welcome to another episode of Stop Button Favorites, a podcast of the website thestopbutton.com. My name is Andrew Wycliffe. My website is thestopbutton.com. Stop Button Favorites is a monthly podcast of audio commentaries to certain films that I've written about on the Stop Button that are my favorites, or some of my favorites. This episode for September 2015, is John Ford's The Searchers, which was recommended as a podcast and audio commentary subject by Philip O'Neill. And I'm watching the Warner Brothers Warner Home Video Blu-ray. And I'll be starting right now. So the first time I saw The Searchers was in college, freshman year of college. I had never watched Westerns growing up. My grandfather, my mom's dad, had only wanted to watch Westerns, and so she never wanted to watch Westerns. She made some exceptions, though I think she told me to see Silverado. I don't think she liked Silverado enough to watch it again. And I loved Dances with Wolves, Wyatt Earp. I remember I saw Bad Girls. That was in that same Wyatt Earp era resurgence of the Western. Didn't like Bad Girls. So when I started watching AMC after high school, I started seeing Westerns, but it was stuff like Oxbow Incident and Jimmy Stewart Universal Westerns. It was not John Wayne Westerns because I also didn't grow up watching John Wayne movies, and I had a certain opinion of him that something like The Green Berets, which I tried watching around this time, certainly didn't dissuade me from. But The Searchers I watched in film class. And I'm going to shut up because look at this shot. So The Searchers is 56. So I'm convinced that John Ford saw and was influenced by Wells just as much as Wells was influenced by him, based on the Henry Fonda John Ford movie from '47. Look at her reactions. This is I've as much as an undergrad can, studied this film for a film class. I've read about it. You can talk about Ford's framing of the family shots and the friend shots later, and how what you get out of the relationship, and also how it moves forward and prepares you for story elements. What The Searchers often does, of course, is it prepares you for story elements. It gets you wondering about story elements. For example, what's the story with John Wayne and her? And then it never answers them for you. And that's one of the more sort of almost veritas too far to go with it, but what I was saying about the what is the name of the movie from The Fugitive, where Henry Fonda is on the run in Mexico. It's very much sort of Citizen Kane, Amberson's, Wells influences, and of course Wells was a big Ford fan in the 30s. And I mean, we're interrupting exposition. I mean, the question is Ethan's brother just completely un, unaware of whatever's going on with Ethan and, is that Martha? Um, Inappropriate flirtation is a good standard of westerns. Um, Boonraku a few years ago, which is a sort of futuristic western thing, um, acknowledged that element of the genre really well. I'd never seen Jeffrey Hunter, and or maybe I actually had seen Sergeant Rutledge by this point. So I was like a Jeffrey Hunter fan. And I'd only ever heard bad things about him because he was the original captain on Star Trek. So such a jerk. My film professor was, I'm not sure if he was convinced, but he thought that Jeffrey Hunter's parentage should be questioned somehow. Like, was he. And the problem with it is that nothing sensational. I mean, I'm sure there is something questionable about it, but Ethan as a character, it doesn't work if he's secretly Ethan's son. It just doesn't work with the character. And so they're not, and it doesn't work with the movie and what they're doing because that could be just such an amazing movie. The claimed half breed son um, hunting his niece, and so this, of course, was interesting. Just this idea that the Civil War could go on, its end could go unknown to the youth of the frontier. Um, One of the interesting things when you start watching a lot of classic movies is seeing how general knowledge is treated, like what the audience is supposed to know going in, what their sentiments are about a subject, what I mean, in the 40s, early 40s, that's fun because you can find your pro FDR and anti FDR movies. But this, if you look at that print, I mean, who knew I could ever be as excited about seeing one of those liver spots on John Wayne's hand? But it's such a good performance from Wayne. I mean, he's had bad performances, he's had mediocre performances, he's had good performances. But this one is just, it's like Ford cuts out the grandstanding. Yeah, it is Martha. The film class, you could just say the chair shows the distance and that Martha and Ethan are together against Aaron, and so now here we have our implication that Ethan's a criminal. And while the searchers, I think I had heard of it. It was somewhat in the vein of Dirty Dozen, is that it was this male classic. Oh, there are John Wayne's small feet that I remember in the '90s. I think some shock jock made a joke about it, and some people got upset. Other people thought it was quite funny how small his feet were. Um, we got Ward Bond coming in here. And Mose Harper, who I should know who plays him, but he's just Mose. But one of the things is that we're almost 10 minutes into the movie and we have no idea what's going to make it. Why is this an American classic? It doesn't have certain hallmarks, predictable hallmarks of what people like in their classic movies. And again, here we have some of those shots where we see how the friends and family function and what their relationships are in. There we got the rocking chair in relation to one another. And this is one of those. I mean, big scenes like this are wonderful to watch and analyze and see how things are going on. But it's just the way Ford uses him in this is he's inviting the viewer into this space and then bringing other elements into it. For example, here comes Ethan. Word Bond I had heard of because in Leonard Maltin's review of Bride of Frankenstein, he says, "Look fast for Ward Bond as a policeman," and Ward Bond is in the riot scene. And there was an exclamation point in parentheses, I believe, behind Ward Bond's name. And Maltin only ever used that when it was like a weird casting choice. So I never could understand once I started seeing old movies, more old movies. Oh, I love that cut. Um, so I was talking about the cut, and then I watched the scene, and I lost my train of thought. Here we have that crime element coming back. We still don't know what it's about. But Ward Bond is what I was talking about. And Ward Bond, so once I started seeing movies on AMC, I'd start seeing Ward Bond and things. And he was in a lot because also at the end of, in the late 90s, there was the AFI's top 100 movies. And I think Ward Bond was in the most of them. He was in like 23 of the 100 best or 13 or something like that. So eventually I learned by sort of broadening my scope of classic movies from Universal horror movies and MGM and American Hitchcock. You know, you kind of miss a lot of Warner Brothers in there. Um, and understanding the studio system more and reading about it sort of after high school, you get a different sort of, it actually feels like you're discovering these movies as though, because you are so familiar with, so he knows whatever the secret is. Ward Bond knows whatever the secret is. I just wonder how Ford directed him. God, so good. One of the things I also was going to say is Ford and Max Steiner, especially since it's Max Steiner. I mean, come on, Max Steiner is the guy who created the idea of, or if he didn't create it, he did one of the first sort of wall-to-wall scores with King Kong, I believe. Now that shot right there is forever aped, also in Superman. Donner uses that shot in Superman with some adaptation and some very beautiful sweeping camera work. But so Ford knew this sort of Technicolor genre picture was bygone. And so he builds that nostalgia in to expectation. I've always taken that to imply that Ethan knows exactly who his parents are and that he's not related to them. And I've never seen Red River, so I guess I don't know if John Wayne and Montgomery Clift played off each other in a similar way. I've always imagined they did, but I don't know. But Ford got John Wayne to act more than anybody else ever did. Certainly more than trying to think Hawks ever did. Just because Ford cared about performances on an individual basis more than Hawks did. You can see that. And that's a very different perspective. Hawks is the studio perspective of the cast and Unity selling it, whereas Ford, and you can see this even in his Will Rogers movies, he wants the individual performances to distract from the whole and from each other. And when Ford movies don't work out, it's usually because of that situation that he isn't doing that. My film professor also said when we were talking about John Huston versus John Ford that, because I think I just was telling him what I'd seen, and I'd just seen Heaven Knows Mr. Allison, which I believe is John Ford. He had said something like, he'd seen something like, so I mean, there you get your very melodramatic strings. You have Ethan actually cleaning the horse like he said that they were supposed to, and you have like the math in his head that he knows whatever is going to happen, he can't prevent it. It's this fatality, a fatalistic look at it. But I guess you'd actually say that that is telling of what he expects of for Lucy as well. But just this very Technicolor look right here. This is intentional on Ford's part. It's this is just such a weird. I mean, here we have them without. It's not Lucy. Sorry. It's this sequence plays. This gives you the most look at the family without Ethan and what he has to do with it. And I mean, it's just serendipitous that it came in like that. But then here we have this very real landscape mixed with what's got to be a set. Except we've seen this in, the world. So it's a very nice move to establish a set on location and then sort of duplicate it in studio. And she just figured it out. But this is before The Unforgiven, which I think was a big Western. And 60s sort of the year where you started seeing, it was the way my mom had always described Western history to me was that you had Westerns with John Wayne and stuff like that. And then you had the Sergio Leone ones, and that totally changed everything. And you can look at it and see that, right? Like Westerns had gotten less popular in the 60s or whatever. And so the Italians were doing them, and they were dead by the late 70s. Butch and Sundance, the early days, can be given that credit. But the thing is, it, they're two different things. The sort of Western is action movie, um, replaced Western as drama, Western as comedy. And there were even Western comedies, but they certainly did have some of that action vibe in it. But Western as drama, that didn't happen for a while. Um, Again. And there we go. We don't get to see anything. Even though it's an obvious influence on Star Wars and The Farm. So, of course, is Monument Valley. Some really nice day for night shooting there, or I guess day for dawn. And it's not in Texas. I think Monument Valley's in Utah. And there we go. There's so one of the right there we go. Never would have had this shot in, the 30s or 40s. Um, but one of the things when I watch this movie again, I always am waiting at this point to see Ethan's reaction to Martin at this point. Martin, of course, is a masculine version of Martha. Um, so, is it Debbie? So, it is Debbie. Man, just I should have looked up the name of the cinematographer, so at least I could have appropriately revered his name. The other thing is about old westerns is there are a lot of, if not funeral songs, church scenes. There is a lot of singing in old westerns. Um, So I think this one has actually been in another um, Western I've seen. So now, just like I said, film class observation, you have Martin and Laurie uh, one way, and then they flip them for the next shot, drawing the attention to them, even though they're part in the whole. Very big Steiner musical moment here. And that is the weird thing when you see somebody like Steiner, and this might happen with Bernard Herrmann, but I think less. When you go from like Steiner's 1934, 1938 scores, and then you look at him in, widescreen color, and you see how he's changed and what he still keeps. It's just it it creates a sensation that you don't really have with modern composers because as far back as you can go for John Williams, eventually he just hit TV movies, and then he makes it to Jaws and Sugarland, and the musical scores have worked the same way. Like you can't get away with using a music cue um, to draw attention to something like that. Uh, you couldn't do it in '78. You can see the guy breathing. Um, in '78 with Superman, when the music says, Superman at the beginning, which I've always noticed, and Donner comments on in one of his commentary tracks for it, you can't get away with that in the rest of the movie. Um, it's too campy. Look at that shot. Oh, man. You got to watch Moe's. I'd kind of have loved to see Star Wars with where Han Solo treated Luke like Ethan treats Martin. I think it would have been really fun with those two. And just to show my fairness, that was a bad cut. Ethan should the sound of him catching it should have been before the this shot, but it wasn't. And here's our hills like white elephants. And that's another thing when you look at older movies is they're not in a vacuum, right? Just because they were censored doesn't mean they're in a vacuum of the material. A good example, of course, is Grapes of Wrath or Razor's Edge, which are even earlier. Love this shot. I've already told the anecdote about how there's like a swamp in World of Warcraft that looks like this. And I used to have a 27-inch iMac, and it was like the most impressive thing to see. Just it was really cool. Now we're on set. But I mean, John Wayne doesn't get to lead these scenes, you know? Ward Bond gets to lead them, or Jeffrey Hunter. And John Wayne's background here. And I mean, it's a star-making turn for Hunter. It's like Ford clearly gives him a lot here, and it's too bad he didn't catch on. Because I mean, you know, Hunter's the classic sympathetic hero in this movie, and or in a movie in this setting. I mean, if you removed Ethan from it, you can see Jeffrey Hunter um, being part of it. This music is actually almost like the Skull. It's practically identical to the Skull Island music in Kong. Yep. So when you're watching this, even when you know the synopsis, right? Wayne and Hunter go looking for the missing. Wow, look at Monument Valley, man, it's so good. Um, this is still following through on that premise, right? We're a third of the way through the movie, and the present action is 3 or 4 days now. But I mean, you have Ward Bond doing almost this comic performance next to Ford or next to Wayne, who's not even, you know, reacting to it. Got a little bit of sped up film there. This shot, I'm always convinced because you see in the bottom right, you saw some land. I'm always convinced that was an insert that they did later for some reason. I suppose I could listen to Richard Schinkel's commentary and see if he talks about things like that, since I'm clearly interested in them. Searchers, for me, is very much like Kane, which I'm ill-advisedly going to do as a commentary track in December, in that I can get lost in sort of I don't know if it's filmmaking minutia, but just the technique. You can get lost in the technique of it. But I mean, getting away with that moment of sincerity from Bond so quick. Very good. I mean, Mose is, I don't know, like if C3PO weren't Niles Crane, but were Cliff Clavin instead. I mean, he's just this wonderful addition to see any scene. Sort of as a humor release, but also sort of without ever leaving the intense melancholy of it. And there you go. He got over killing someone. I mean, it's Ford has established that it is a very serious film and that is a very serious action sequence. Yet he's able to get away with that sort of moment with Bond and Wayne where and here we have Wayne killing for pleasure. '56. I'm just trying to think when Friendly Persuasion came along. Is that Harry Carey Jr.? If so, he played a very similar part in Rio Grande, um, which I hate. I loathe that movie. I just watched it, and it, his place in the western is, I don't know if I'd go so far as to say it's not a genre standard, but the younger men learning, coming into their own certainly became to be a standard in the western starting in, well, Rio Grande is 49 or 50, and it makes it more identifiable to younger viewers that you have your 15-year-old who enlisted young and things like that. Um, Whereas your lead is at this point John Wayne's age and probably old enough to be Jeffrey Hunter's father. What's so frustrating about John Wayne is that he'll give a performance like this and then he'll give a really crappy one. I don't know, McHugh, right? Like, I don't just something absurdly crappy. And there's just no he's not some actor who does crappy movies and turns in a good performance, right? It's almost like it's almost like he knew what he was doing. He was consciously not trying very hard on some movies, usually his more popular movies. And you can say that of numerous actors. But John Wayne's popularity is based on those other movies. There's like a commercial aspect to it, almost cravenly commercial. You don't see that from somebody like William Holden, who's consistently acting, putting effort into it. But, take John Wayne or that's maybe the most character development Ethan's gotten so far, and it's 40 minutes in. Um, the sound design on this, um, historical inaccuracies, etc., aside, and probably not. I mean, when you think about German, Russian war crimes and so on, Japanese, French, whatever. Um, Not sort of acknowledging. I mean, it's sorry. Damn, that was good. Look at how good that is. Oh. And they actually, put Jeffrey Hunter in a hole to make John Wayne so much taller than him or taller than him at all. So good. Um, just the way suggestions are done in the film, sort of to keep it clean, requires inventiveness that a nuance that love that cut. I'm just watching, sorry. When they were going to remake this as a space western with, I think it was Jason Patric and Bruce Willis, um, I just could sort of see that that would be their trailer moment, and Bruce Willis wouldn't be able to do the monologue. And now we have, a very big change. We have a return to the opening shot, but it's brighter It's a different family, and we see the Jorgensen's pipe, so we know it's him. It's a relatively small cast. Not just by the time you have the dance sequence or the wedding, that many people is just so many. Vera Mills, I believe. So now they've been looking for a year, I believe. We find out 6 months, maybe. Oh no, there's a huge fight between Ethan and Lori, which establishes that they. Yep, here we go. So they've been hunting for a year and they're coming through. So it's further on even from the snows. Like this isn't like they gave up in the snow. This is what happened after that. But I was just going to say we're 45 minutes in and we're just finding out that there's this, subplot in the ground situation that they're courting where they ought to be. Love it. There's a certain worldliness even in his aloofness to Hunter at this point. Martin's grown up. Okay, the bath scene. I love the bath scene. And so now, 2 minutes later, we're catching up. Is this the first time she says Texican? Yep. That must have just played so well in Texas in 56. They must just have felt so good about themselves. She's a very interesting sort of, not foil. Uh, Lars is a Lars is a dip, right? Lars is a big-hearted moron. She's smart, right? So she and Ethan bond and sort of look at Lars like a pet. But and then there's some more details in a bit, in a second, after Ethan gets done reading. That light reflecting in Lars's glasses has got to be the lighting. It can't be that because I mean the only in scene lighting is that lamp on the table. I wonder if it's on the Easter eggs. Ditto on her sort of the thing in her hair, barrette. I love the way Ford uses headroom. I mean, this is the thing is this is not Panavision, right? This the Searchers is a perfect example of why a um, 185 or 177 can be an ideal aspect ratio for a widescreen experience. So the my film professor always wanted to know what Ethan was going to tell Martin there. To the point, I think he like was wondering if it was in the book. But and now we have a nice romantic comedy moment, and of course Ford never really did a lot of romantic comedy. Um, but I always thought Ethan was just going to tell um, Martin that he was proud of him. I mean, it just seemed. I mean, Ethan had just set him up with like a good life, and he was going to sort of let him loose. Wow, here we go. And there you go, right? They've known each other that long. She wasn't just some sympathetic character at the funeral 35 minutes ago. We're 52 minutes in, and we find out that they've been, you know, betrothed for 20 years. So there's this sort of, for lack of a better term, Puritan, uh, angry woman thing she does. And Miles exaggerates it. But she's not always doing it. It's there's your yep. So they've been on for 2 years, which means her brother was hunting for them for a year. That's not technically a jump cut, but it is a jump cut. Like she walked away and then came in at a reverse of the angle. Now we're at Futterman's. We don't get to see them meet up again. See, this is the stuff I love in this movie is they're together again. They're valuable, or they see each other's value again. So we're 55 minutes in. We're not quite halfway out. This is, of course, a scene that I was sort of familiar with because of Leone really liked the crappy shopkeeper or the funny shopkeeper. So I'd seen it in 3 or 4 movies. So now we're getting a look at their relationship as it's changed. This is the first time we've really seen them together outside of a dramatic scene, melodramatic scene. Sort of the bickering. I mean, it's see, it's not a buddy movie, and that's if Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid created the sort of buddy movie, which could put 2 popular stars together. Ford did get good. Yep, look at that small foot. Wow. I think he's wearing a heel. Yes, he is. He's the Robert Downey Jr. of classic Hollywood, ladies and gentlemen. In more ways than one. And this is just also, I don't think I finished this thought earlier. Even though it's a film classic, you don't know where it's going. The plot outline that you're given doesn't prepare you for scenes like this. And there we go. And he's just going to go to sleep with the body over there. Well, and so yeah, there you go. We're playing it for humor. Okay, so they are leaving. But they're playing that line for humor, except it never did occur to him, just like it never occurred to him that he might get back in time to the farm to save it. It never occurs to him that he should save Debbie, rescue Debbie. Oh, Charlie. Uh, and he's going to sing. He's such a tool. And it took me a second the first time I saw it to realize he'd been on the search party. He'd be he didn't get much dialogue at all there, so that he's sort of moved on with his life and become this dope. Um, and so this is their first scene without Ethan or Martin, and we're opening with it. It's an opening of a scene just like when Ethan and Martin got to the Jorgensen farm um, 15 years ago. But there's this implication that it's not that far away as not so much time has progressed as the last time. The late Mr. Futterman. Oh, I love Mrs. Jorgensen. I wish I knew who played her. And this is, the movie's half over. This would be the first time I'd say that it has an element of sort of epical. When you think of something being a beloved classic, this sequence is the one that stands out. Um, it's accessible, it's adorable. Yeah. And I wonder, I mean, again, this would be something to read the listen to the Richard Schinkel commentary on, because and I love the Steiner score here. I mean, it's so playful. But I guess just what I mean is, was this always intended to be done this way? It's a very, it stands out in a way that not not many movies layer, when they do multi-layered narrative, layer it with this level of sort of artifice. And we've just gone from it being in the imagination of the Jorgensens listening to the letter to what actually occurred. It's an interesting sort of technique, and it almost goes, well, this is the next episode of The Searchers. It's like the first hour is the pilot episode, the cliffhangers after the Futterman thing, and now we have part two of The Searchers. So now we have situation comedy. And I mean, just with the change in the relationship between Martin and Ethan, it just seems so different. So there you have Ma Jorgensen with all that sympathy, and Charlie just a total jackass. So, and I mean, now this actually shows you more about the family dynamic. She has all the empathy, but it's questionable whether or not she wants Lori to read it for Lori or sort of to, or if it's for, the family unit benefit that the letter is an important thing. But now and then we return, we go back into the frame, and the Mrs. Pauly that the day for night in this is so good that when you see something else, um, like from the 70s that has bad day for night, it makes you wonder what sort of intelligence was lost between generations of uh, cinematographers that the guy who shot this knew how to use his filters, and some guy shooting for, I don't know, Frankenheimer, Friedkin, and 77 didn't know how to do it anymore. And to some degree, I wonder if that's like the fault of, and this is just, cruelty. Um, well, I mean, and it's Ethan mocking Martin's racism that Martin didn't know he had. Um, but what I was going to say about the what was I going to say about the photography? And I mean, Look has been so sympathetic, right? Like she was so gently handled in the opening scene. She's so cute. And there we have the water with the same exact level of daylight that it previously had. But I was going to say that Deliverance had a very artificial day for night, stylized. And even when people weren't trying to do it stylized, it's almost like they just didn't care about it anymore. And these moments make look Ethan so lovable, the lovable uncle, that when we get to um, his meanness again, it's sort of disturbing. it's a way to reset the audience's sort of sympathy level, empathy level, and it also lends to the sort of part two aspect of it, and the way um, the narrative's broken up, um, and the summary to scene makes this sequence feel a lot longer than it is, and in sort of good thing he's never been in a Robert Rodriguez movie. He'd never stop shooting. So I mean, it's just so much hatred, and lovable Uncle Ethan becomes very different. And so we've lost sort of the gentle humor aspect of the frame, the narrative frame. And we've also got this Jeffrey Hunter setting up what we're supposed to expect from the events of this day. Was it Ethan freaking out, or is it these stuntmen, stunt riders going down a mountain to camp? But it's no. This is what um, this troubling discovery was the thing that screwed up Marty's day. And then it's just this kick in the ass right here that looks dead. Right? Does he go to look? No. So we've gone from when Martin felt like looking at um, a, a dead acquaintance or loved one was important to him being totally okay with not looking. Sort of Ethan's sense of fatalism is creeping up on Marty and aging him. And we also have the grand scale now. I mean, look at this. We've got um, more people per shot than have been in the movie to this point. And I mean, this you can't even count, right? It's so many that we've gone from a movie that had at most 20 people in it, not counting the Comanches. And one thing I remember talking to other film enthusiasts about with this film who did not like uh, one friend of mine, Pete, referred to this as the movie where um, John Ford realized he was full of shit, which I don't agree with actually, because there's a certain sort of it not entirely right. Like, yes, Ford had really crappy characterizations and sort of cultural philosophy of American Indians in a bunch of his movies, but he also didn't in a bunch of other ones. So it's very different. And this is just terrifying the audience, right? Like, shouldn't you just shoot them? At this point, they've gone mad. So we've got all their. It's interesting how the film deals with this sort of racism because I think Mrs. Jorgensen says that we need to stop, that Martin needs to stop Ethan or something, or maybe the inverse. I mean, so there's no talking about it. There's no. But in that scene where the casual racism of the guard, Ethan's overt racism, and Marty's sort of fear, awareness of his own possibility of sort of racism, violent racism, would uh, has to be there. I mean, it. And now we're turning it into, the end of the episode. They'll never find that girl, but next week we'll get another letter and maybe they will. Oh, such a moron. He's a sleazeball. He's a harmless sleazeball moron. There aren't very many of those. But he can sing. Is he the guy in Rio Grande that sings? I wonder. But yeah, he can sing. So he's not incompetent. It's weird. It's such a weird character. Um, and how do we know we're in Mexico? Well, there are sombreros and a little bit of the music. And here we go. So this is us seeing them out of the letter frame too. So Wayne's got gray hair, Mose has got some facial hair, and Jeffrey Hunter just got a heartthrob haircut versus having a haircut more appropriate for if you were 28 playing a teenager. So my anecdote about the rocking chair is that when I was in grad school, um, one of my professors, instructors, uh, who was a fine artist and also mixed media, made a short film called The Searchers, which used the song from The Searchers, sort of uh, stylized with the old time Western sepia thing going on, and it was shots of the idea of searchers as people who look for free furniture. And I remember when I got to the end, I was like, it had to end with a rocking chair, and he's just like, that I didn't find one, and so there's like this. I've never the art. He didn't want there to be artifice, even on that level, but whereas I thought that playing toward it being a playing up the searchers element was more important than it being honest, actually. And so we're missing out on what Wayne's finding out right now. Ethan's finding all that stuff out, and so Jeffrey Hunter's a good-looking man, and Mose. Oh, and the dancer does not get to see Marty in the buff. One of the other things about Hollywood westerns. So before I saw The Searchers, I'd probably even seen stuff like Broken Arrow, the one where Jeff Chandler plays a Native American chief. Um, in the desert, of course, because there were lots in the desert. It was really awkward to see one set in sort of the Northeast, and those films sort of stand out. But the Sergio Leone ones did not have running across an American Indian tribe as a plot point, which most westerns always did. It's like people expected to see them. We got the wind. We got a little bit of wind in the sound here, and the structure of scenes has changed a lot. So he's vain. I like this. The sort of someone undoubtedly just based on how popular musing on the American Western has been, undoubtedly has looked at um, the characterization of Native Americans, hopefully to the point that they looked at how the characters function in scenes. And is it the big reveal? It's the big reveal. There we go. And is this Natalie Wood's first movie? It's not. No, because wasn't she the kid in um the Miracle on 34th Street, which I need to see again? But I like that Ford had the other wife with her back turned, and he could have done two, right? He could have done waited for the reveal, but he just went with it because now you just get Marty reduced to a different type of role, an unsure role, and but given time to um, the sort of um, what's the word, peasant royalty of native Mexicans that you see in a handful of westerns. I can think of other. Um, well, I don't know. I can't think of any specific examples, but there are other ones because when it's in the Three Burials of Melekes, I can't remember the rest of the title. The Tommy Lee Jones movie deals with it a little bit, and there we go. The music cueing us, getting us ready. We know something they don't, and boom. And Martin's back, by the way. He's not shocked anymore. He's gotten with it. Good thing there was a bridge. And now we get, I mean, he's not willing to shoot Martin. At least not to threaten to shoot him through him. Um, how far? Okay, so we've got 30 minutes left. So just trying to think how. And now we have a shot actually that calls back to the beginning, which is important, um, or will be important because Ford echoes it again later. Um, Sort of with the dual callback, um, sort of repurposing the visual. And this isn't a sweeping, sort of western. It's Ford sets it in a naturally sweeping location and then doesn't do anything with it. I mean, not doesn't do anything with it. He just that that does its job. Um, Very nice, very um, calm sort of setup there. Because yeah, now we're a half hour. So we're a half hour into seeing these two together. Yeah. Okay. So other film class story was is that I made a big deal out of this um, shot and setup, um, and their relationship and how it represents it and stuff. And my essay was chosen as the example to be read um, for all the essays answers on the searchers, and it was really funny because um, my the professor started reading it, and I didn't know it was mine. I'd forgotten the introduction, and even when he called me up, I was surprised as to that it was mine. I'd forgotten precisely what I'd said. Um, that was, I think, in my second film class because um, I knew that he read essays, and being the brown nose, will we go with that? Scholarly, pseudo scholarly brown nose. Um, the reason it's an important thing is because until that point, until that ambition to write one of the best essays on the final or midterm, I never would have made the sort of conclusions that I made in that essay. The reuse of the line, stuck by the boulder. Um, and here we go. Now we're into a, if not comic, at least genial sequence. But yeah, the sort of bold um, opinions I often form about a film. It started with my attempt to be impressive in a film class to fuel my ego, which in grad school I remember one of my professors was shocked to find out I was a Leo, and I'd never known traits of a Leo, but I was like, actually, in certain circumstances, specifically academic ones, it comes through. I might even have a copy of that essay. I just don't know where the heck it would be. I think I have one box of collected stuff from undergraduate, but it'd be interesting to see it again. And Ward Bond is still all right, everybody. I mean, that's, you know, we haven't seen him for an hour, and it it puts the film, I don't know if you'd say, into its third act, but it certainly starts an episode of the Searchers. It starts the third episode of the Searchers TV show. Read of the narrative. one of the things that I did really pay attention to when I was a um, in film class was, and I talked about timing a little bit earlier, was timing. Because when you watch a movie for pure entertainment, um, like, or not without critically thinking about its making or sort of narrative composition, you um, so there we go. They've bought it again. I mean, just looking at how their relationship progresses throughout the film, and then Lars isn't very happy to see them. Um, Understanding how much time something takes, maybe in relation to how much of the film it takes up, right? So our flashback took up 15 minutes, which is, Ford's got 2 hours to tell the story. That's a chunk. It's a pretty good chunk. It's an eighth, I think, or 12th, or 10th, 10th ish. But then it's such a different film than the beginning. Five years. So that means she put off Charlie for 2 years, maybe? And there we go. At 97, we find out that 97 minutes, we find out that the romantic, subplot that's been part of her sort of ground situation was part of his. And it's just this really neat. It's the only time that Ford and the screenwriter, whoever it is, um, it's the only time that there's that sort of payoff, other than maybe Debbie and the conclusion. But even the conclusion doesn't go as far with it as, say, this scene does, which just ended in a sort of classical face off. I've always liked to think that he was defending Look's honor. And now we have a comedic classic um, sort of screwball fight scene. Like, you can just see that they, could have cut them getting stuck in the door together. And then you have this sort of sensitivity to one another, even though Marty thinks he's a total doof, which he is. in this sort of protracted summer camp honor. It, it distracts from asking what's going to happen to Debbie. It distracts from asking how serious is a movie where you've got Jeffrey Hunter biting somebody's knee. How serious it's gonna Ford's gonna let the conclusion get, especially when Ward Bod can't even not laugh. Don't like that. Don't like that cut. Something about that kick. Something about the way that Jeffrey Hunter kicks him. It almost feels like a comedic version of Ombre, um, which has other. Of course, Mrs. Jorgensen's fighting for love, while Lars doesn't know, and Lori's secretly delighted. And now we get Charlie sort of growing up or revealing that, and John Wayne's in the background reminding you that this isn't the movie. Um, and it's a nice wedding party. Nobody got married, but it's not quite as it's not one of the most memorable wedding scenes. Um, it's not as it's not overdone. So it makes me just wonder about how the film was regarded as a classic. Not why, I know why, but how people regarded it. Sort of the historiography of Searcher's appreciation. Way Ward Bond says demise is the same way that Quint says it in Jaws. Robert Shaw says it. And here we've got Patrick Wayne in just a wonderful cameo. Um, Making, is this the second? Um, Patrick Wayne, of course, is the lead of People the Time Forgot. So I did a commentary on that a couple months ago, and I wonder if he's the only crossover actor so far. I should look, but he's just lovable, and it's this weird and very John Ford Western cavalry. It's like a throwback to the Rio Grande. And I mean, so you've just got Wayne making fun of his son playing a Yankee cavalryman in a John Ford movie where at one point John Wayne played a Yankee cavalryman who had a son, not played by his son, directed by John Ford, Rio Grande. it's undoubtable that there was a connection for the filmmakers, uh, acknowledgement of it at some point. So we get the family back together because Mose is there. And Mose is sort of the center of the new family in the same way that Martha was of the old family. She has to be, he has to be there um, in some way, um, sort of to make the audience feel comfortable. Whereas during the letter reading sequence, it was uneasy because of Charlie and just the drama related to the letter itself. There is rocking chair. And this is just a great shot. And this is the new Charlie. I mean, he's still a doof, but he's back in the mode of being an effective sort of action hero and a formidable one. Good thing they're cattle ranchers. And giving Ward Bond this, it just is, since he and John Wayne had such a relationship, and look at the way Ford is directing it. You're supposed to look at Patrick Wayne right now, and you're supposed to figure out that it's Patrick Wayne at some point. Without Pay is not funny anymore. Ward Bond's, you know, ready to go, and the heaviness has returned. And Max Steiner's music is telling us we're gonna maybe resolve this. So another it's too late. Whoa. It's Laurie who does this. Who finally 11 minutes from the end of the movie says, reveals the sort of deep racism, the senseless racism that you doesn't necessarily fuel the quest, because Marty would have gone on it anyway. But and then we have this sequence, which opens with, that great cut, these great cuts. Look at this photography. Um, and it's Ford getting to do Monument Valley, all of it. Um, I don't know if I don't know if Ward Bond's ever done, or has he? I don't know that I've ever seen him in a role where he's playing a young version of the Reverend. He tends to, I think I've seen him in villain roles, sort of comic relief roles, supporting roles, but I don't know if I've ever seen him in a supporting role of that nature. Probably have. I just have forgotten. So here's this. Yeah, see, you've got to play that the ground situation's even longer, goes even further back, and that Ethan isn't set up to lie about that. So the question is, I mean, it's just sort of this racism, general racism can't work on him, so personal vengeance has to. And I like in Wayne's turn there, the wordless surprise when he hurries up. And now we all get shirtless Jeffrey Hunter. I'm not sure how they shot some of this during the day and got that out of it because, like, you just don't see this level of quality in day for night shooting anymore. I mean, you wouldn't do it anymore because, well, maybe it would. I mean, there's a filter in iMovie, I think. But I think 80s action, sort of 80s adventure television with Bad Day for Night hurt the practice, the technique. And there we go, Patrick Wayne again. I mean, just the humor of it. Does your paw know you're out here when John Wayne's standing right there? It's just such a weird inside joke in a movie that it's it's an inside joke for a very reserved, uh, small level of the viewership. Yet, for whatever reason, Ford thinks that the ones who are going to get those jokes are the ones who actually need the most relief during the film. Which I guess in some ways you could argue, since he's telling them not to be stupid racists, that, I mean, and having Laurie be such a shit, though not irredeemable. See, right? Because Laurie is, wonderful and everything, and she, even though she's racist about this, she's not irredeemable. So maybe the viewers aren't either. So it's. I don't know that I necessarily ever looked at how Ford approaches the racism, just because, I mean, I've certainly, because it's not part of the filmmaking technique. It's not even part of the narrative technique. It's in between. It's the script and the filmmaking technique and what they sort of make together. The result of these things. I swear he uses sped up film here too. And then Scar's back. Because really, or I think that's Scar, but I mean, there's the sort of, the other thing is, of course, is it's women as property on both sides. Debbie's property to the to Scar, just in the same way that, yep. So Scar was the stand-in for John Wayne, and of course, his meanness, Ethan's meanness, can't take a break. I mean, and then, okay, so we're in the last five, we're under last 3.5 minutes of the movie, and Ford manages to have laid enough groundwork that he can turn Patrick Wayne into this wonderful sidekick for Ward Bond, who previously didn't need a sidekick. Like, it's this sort of unexpected delight of the film, I guess. It's the whipped cream on the film, on a film that has no point in having whipped cream. That is a shot out of a silent. I swear that this sequence, the way they cut that without an establishing shot, is out of Ford's paying homage to somebody with that. And there we go. We've got to return to the cave, a cave of safety, which echoes back to the home at the beginning. And then, why did he just yell Debbie? And definitely sped up. And the thing is that beyond him giving her that little medal, there was no relationship between Ethan and Debbie, and not even when they, sort of revealed the relationship between her and Martin. I think that another actor, another director or something, that would have been John Wayne in makeup. Richard Donner and Mel Gibson, that would have been Mel Gibson in makeup. Because it was just the father showing up was, maybe it was bit casting, I don't know. But it's a perfect opportunity for when they don't. Moe's on his rocking chair. The framing of the family flipped from the framing of the family at the beginning. And is Martin going to forgive her? Yep, he does. Because how can you not? Because you can't really believe that John Wayne was ever going to kill her. Come on. Of course, that probably never would have occurred to Lars. But I mean, there's no way he was going to kill Martha's daughter, which is a nice way of keeping that in the film. It keeps a character continuity that you might not have even thought of if Laurie hadn't brought up it's what Martha would have wanted. Because if Martha would have wanted that, Martin couldn't believe that because it would have meant that she wanted him dead when Ethan found him, or blah blah blah, or left. And you get Ford being very symbolic there, that the racism walks away, the old world thinking has to walk away, and the people in the house represent where the viewer is, where the world is. And that does it for my Searchers commentary, which, if it is a repeat of an actor, Patrick Wayne, it's also the first time I ever went over the end of the movie, as far as I know, with the actual content of the commentary, which means you could be watching this to the menu of your Blu-ray or to a black computer screen because the file has stopped. Next month, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm doing something for October, and that'll be out October 20th. And thank you for listening to this episode of Stop Button Favorites, where I talked about John Ford's The Searchers.
This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.